Before we dive into the implementation, let's talk about some basics. The data is stored in the UNOVA Type2 node in the form of assets and events. An asset is a digital entity of any physical conceptual element in the supply chain. Assets are essentially products whose data we trace through the supply chain. Depending on the industry, an asset could be a steak, a car, a box of apples, or even a sweater. Events are actions that happen to the assets as the asset moves through the supply chain. Some examples of events are a transport event, where the asset moves from one place to another, a quality check event, a veterinary event in case the asset is a livestock, or temperature registration events in case of cold chain. As collection of ESG data is becoming more and more important and relevant, information like carbon offset, carbon footprint, water conservation and consumption can also be registered on the system in form of events. Here we merely show you a few examples of asset types and event types, but the flexible data structure allows the companies to create multiple types of assets and events depending on the data they store. Now let's move on to implementation. Asset and event data can be sent to the Type2 node in two simple steps. The first step is to create a token, which we call the UNOVA token. The Create API uses Web3 authorization and authentication, which means that you can create this token using your wallet private key and do not need to remember any additional username and password for authentication. Here you see the URL of the API. An important thing to notice in this URL is the IP. This IP is the IP of the Type2 node that you want to communicate with. May it be a data up request or a data down request, this IP is essential. Let's look at the request body now. The request body is very simple. It has only your private key as one parameter, and then we simply hit send. Here we get the UNOVA token, which will be used in the header of your data request to authenticate a data up request or a data down request. The second step is to create asset and event data. The token created in step 1 will be used in the header under key authorization and value UNOVA token in the data requests of assets and events. The body is very simple. It consists of mandatory fields and extra fields. The API does not have any limit on the number of fields, so you can share as much as relevant information you want with your partners. The Create API differentiates between an asset request and an event request using the type of request parameter. So here we see an asset request, and here we see an event request. You need to implement this API only once for all the steps in your company, and then upload bulk data by changing the values in the key value pair. To help you visualize the steps in your company with respect to asset and event creation, we have the Chain Builder tool on our onboarding platform. Use this tool to create your chain and then implement the API for each step with respect to this chain. In case you want to create references between assets, the assets referenced or added parameter can be used. This parameter works in both cases, whether an asset is split into multiple assets or multiple assets come together to form a single asset. It accepts comma-separated values, so you can enter either one or multiple references to the asset mentioned in the unique ID parameter. Let us now look at an example. Here we will look at the creation of a sweater asset. In the headers, I have already put the key authorization and the UNOVA token. The type of request here is asset, as mentioned earlier, because we are sending a data request to create an asset. The private key is the same one that was used to create the authorization token. Event type and name correspond to the step that is happening in the company. So the name of the step is clothing manufacturing, in this case a sweater. And the event type is transformation, as multiple assets will transform into one asset. So the event type here is transformation. In case it's the first occurrence of an asset, the event type would be commission. Unique ID is an important parameter as it corresponds to a unique identifier, which is different for each asset. It's typically found on the barcode or the QR code on the asset. Timestamp refers to when the asset was created in the company. The next 4 fields give us information about the company itself. The asset type here is sweater. So this basically is what kind of asset you are creating. So it's a generic name, but all the assets that are created under a single asset type will have different unique IDs. For example, here the asset type sweater will be reused for many sweaters, but each of them will have a different unique ID. Packaging ID refers to how the asset was packaged, whether it was put in a lot, whether it was put in a pallet, or it was packaged individually, so serial. Assets referenced or added will be used for creating references between different assets. So here we see the 4 different assets that went into forming this one single asset. We have quantity and unit of measure here. The rest of the fields are extra fields. So here there is a few, but this list could be more exhaustive and longer depending on how much amount of data you have to share with your partners. Let me change the unique ID and let us hit send to check the response. The first part is the metadata. In the identifiers section, you will see the unique ID of the asset that was created and the unique IDs of the assets that were referenced or which went into the asset. The rest of the information is here, right below the identifiers section. And this is again metadata. So if the status is 200, it's okay. So that means that the request was successful and the data is created. Moving on to the event example. Here we will see the creation of an event that is used to register the carbon footprint statistics. So the type of request is event. Private key is the same that is used to create the token. Event type and name correspond to the step in the company. So this is an observation event and the name is carbon footprint statistics. In unique ID, I have used the same unique ID of the sweater that we created earlier. So these statistics will be specially about this sweater. The timestamp is when the event was registered in the company. The next 4 fields give us information about the company itself. So if you see, there's not a lot of difference between the asset request and the event request. The body is very simple and the fields are also similar. The asset type, quantity, and unit of measure remains the same as in the asset creation. And the rest of the information that is regarding the carbon footprint statistics is here. So this means that these fields are extra fields and all this information is registered against this asset. We will hit send to see the response. Here is the metadata about the event. All the information of the event is here. In the identifiers, we see the unique ID on which the event was created. And the status is again 200. Like I said earlier, if the status is 200 and okay, that means the request was sent successfully and the data has been created. Next, I will talk about the API documentation. On this link, you will find all the details about how to implement the Create API, information about the token, assets, as well as events. To reduce your effort, there is a drop-down where you can select the language of implementation of your choice, and the website will create a sample request body for you. So this is a sample request in curl, which I had selected in the drop-down. You can change the values in this request, add additional fields, and play around, but the basic request is already created for you. To check out more details about the Create API and the documentation, click on the link below.